Greg Solier now brings us his farm weather forecast for the week ahead, presented by Pivot BioProven 40. Predictable, productive, weatherproof. Turn to a better nitrogen. Turn to Pivot BioProven 40. Learn more at pivotbio.com. Ringing out the old year, we have to look into the early days of the new year with Greg Solier's perspective and a little longer view, perhaps, through the winter season. Somebody asked me, how can he do this? How can he look out that far in advance? What's your methodology?
It's science. It's experience in forecasting. It's a gentleman by the name of Earl Finkel. It's a lot of stuff. Yes, exactly. Mostly experience at this point in my career.
Well, let's look at this El Nino thing. Is it diminishing?
It's beginning to, but we'll really get into it here as we get deeper into the winter season. But a good point that you brought up, Max, is El Nino. Let's take a look at it. And it's really how we've gotten to this point, the soup to nuts, the really sausage-making part of meteorology here. You have the main polar branch of the jet stream, which has been riding across the Pacific Northwest, an occasional burst of cold air into parts of New England, the Corn Belt, the Mid-Atlantic region. This is where we've seen a lot of the storminess so far in the winter season, parts of the Pacific Northwest, and then a little more typical traditional El Nino, but we haven't seen much of it, nor do we expect a lot of it into Southern California, the desert Southwest, the Gulf Coast. Here, this green arrowed area would be the subtropical jet, Max. So we've got moisture here, cold here, and much of the Corn Belt areas. Plain states and points on westward, mild and dry. Those winds come roaring out of the Rockies, downslope of conditions, compressional warming, as we call it in the weather business. That's how we come up with the warmth, if you will, relative to wintertime, and an absence of any significant snow on the ground so far.
Still quite a bit of an area of the United States that is too dry.
Exactly. The drought highlights, if you will, going into the new year. A lot of the country here, more than half to three-quarters, in some sense of too dry category. Pacific Northwest, up near the Canadian border, much of the heartland, sections of the eastern Corn Belt, really the worst of it here. Tennessee Valley, Mid-South, lower Mississippi Valley, Delta region, Texas, southwestern states, and back into parts of the plains. A little too dry despite some recent snowfall into the northeast and New England. Going forward, we don't really anticipate here into the early stretch of wintertime and through midwinter time really any significant improvement. Yeah, we do like to get improvement. There's not a lot of frost or freeze in the ground, so some snowfall would help. But really, it's been focused into this part of the country where we will see some dryness improvement here relative to snowpack and snow cover. Some improvement, not a lot though. Southern Mid-Atlantic, Gulf Coast, parts of Texas, the Rio Grande, into the lower desert region and the Pacific Northwest. But Max, a lot of the country expected to see the drought persist relative to wintertime or perhaps worsen. So there are trade-offs to El Nino. Mild and dry in some areas, comfortable for outdoor work, not great with soil moisture in mind.
We think back over the years, and the first few weeks of the new year are often very cold days. How do you see the early part of January 24 in terms of temperature?
Well, El Nino still holding on. It's a moderate category 1, and it's not like we're chasing ping pong balls around here. You just don't throw a switch and all of a sudden we're back into a neutral state atmosphere. So it continues on, a delightful go of it. Not great if you're in the snowplow business or looking for insulation in some of those fields with snow cover. Look at the warmth over the Canadian prairie, the northern plains, much of the upper Midwest into the northeast of New England, parts of the Pacific Northwest as well. Temperatures about normal through California, the southern plains, and the southeastern parts of the country, and through early January, Max, a little bit below average across the Gulf Coast areas, where we do anticipate a little further improvement of the storm track. It's not going to be a robust El Nino, mind you, and those El Nino years, they vary whenever we do come up with them, but some semblance of moisture, Southern California, down through the Rio Grande, the Gulf Coast area, and look at the expanse of quiet weather relative to early January in the heart of wintertime across the plains, the Midwest, and a good chunk of the Corn Belt, sir.
My goodness, we might get a little bit of a break on heating bills this winter. Let's look at mid-January.
Things begin to turn, the effects of a weakening El Nino, and we've seen some of these, cold air intrusions. Just because you're into a mild El Nino setup doesn't mean you're not going to deal with Arctic air or winter storms, just fewer of them. But as you weaken this El Nino setup, more and more of them will come into fruition. So here's some cold air once again laying out across the northern parts of the country, up towards the Soo, the warmth compressed down across the Mid-Atlantic region, the southern plains, the western parts of the country, good part of the central Midwest and Corn Belt temperature temperatures about normal. Same with areas down towards Dixie. And precipitation, here we go, Max, beginning to see a pickup in the Pacific Northwest. More traditional winter weather here into the northern plains, much of the northern and eastern Corn Belt, eastern states as well, and a quiet weather picture down through Texas and the desert Southwest.
Along about the time of the Louisville Farm Show, the middle part of February, we can still see some wintry precip then, to be sure. And it can often be quite cold.
Yeah, cold, and sometimes it's those freezing rain events and icing events down towards the Ohio Valley. But the cold air easing just a bit across the Great Lakes region into the northeast of New England, the warm ridge, if you will, relative to winter time on the southern plains, parts of the western states, and a fair amount of the upper Midwest down to the Ohio Valley. Temperatures on target for mid-February into mid-March. Otherwise, here we go with a little busier storm track. Clipper systems into the upper Midwest, northern sections of the Corn Belt, mid-Atlantic region, normal precip over the southeast down towards the Rio Grande Desert Southwest. So as we get deeper on into the wintertime season, Max, the weather turns a little more wintry as you would expect.
All right, sir, stand by. Greg will be right back with his spring outlook.